So when we think about what living in ancient Egypt would be like, we often imagine the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx, or even the innumerable amount of giant megalithic statues or temples scattered throughout all of ancient Egypt. But so few people actually step foot within these structures that we recognize today, even during the time that they were being used. So what was the life of an ancient Egyptian like? I'm Luke Caverns, and this is What If You Were Born in Ancient Egypt, Slave Edition. So ancient Egyptians actually had no explicit word for the term slave, or at least not any that we have knowledge of. The only thing we have is the use of the word skru-anks, which is used to describe somebody who is bound to serve. And the evidence shows us that ancient Egypt actually had a very unique slaving system. There were only a few different ways in very specific circumstances when somebody might find themselves being enslaved in ancient Egypt. One being the most simple is that you were born to a woman who was already a slave. And this woman, among other slaves, was likely captured during battle or war, or was considerably indebted to the Egyptian government. And they had no means to pay that debt, so they either became an indebted servant or... We also know a little bit about slaves who are known as the shabti, not to be confused with the doll. And these were people who were obviously not royalty, but they very much desired or were even desperate to move on to the afterlife. So much so that they would indenture themselves for life and become funerary assistants for the rest of their life and help with the mummification process as well as many other things. Now, any one of these slaves could have been involved in military expeditions to go out and capture and acquire more slaves, as well as quarrying, mining, farming, construction, anything that the Egyptian government deemed necessary. However, the slaves did not build the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, otherwise the three great pyramids that we all know and love. Now let's say you are a poorer person in ancient Egypt and you borrow grain from your neighbor and now you're no longer able to repay that debt. Well, you may be asked or forced to offer up your daughter or son as a servant to your neighbor for potentially the rest of their life, or maybe if they're lucky until the debt is repaid, whatever that may mean. If you were the average slave, you'd spend every night sleeping outside on the dirt or on a straw bed. If you were the lucky slave serving the royal family, well, you'd be treated like royalty. All in all, ancient Egypt was not the worst place in all of history to have been a slave. Enslaved men could marry Egyptian women, they could own property, they could even potentially work their way out of slavery. And this is made possible because ancient Egypt's economy was never built on slavery in the same way that the southern United States was at one point. Hence why we don't see the dehumanization of slaves in ancient Egypt. Like and follow for more.